But this was something that popped up. And so AmeriCorps was someone like me. I had experience building cities. I said, well, what if I gave my life and went and spent a year building low-income housing? Well, West Lafayette's actually my hometown, and so somehow I managed to get a placement back here in central Indiana and spent a year actually working with Habitat for Humanity. And there were two sides of this job. One side was I was doing the real estate transactions for them. And then the other side was that 5 days a week I swung a hammer with volunteers, right? And I think we built 32 houses that year, right? I'd never built a house before in my life. But what I found was that working directly one-on-one with people was really, really rewarding. And I'd been accepted to go to grad school. How many of you see grad school in your future someday? All right. Why would you go to grad school?
Because I want to work in management.
Okay, that's one reason, right? To get that leg up, right? What's another reason to go to grad school? Or is that it?
Just to further expand your basic knowledge that you have and can use in the profession.
Right? And so those two, well, you can go for it too, yeah.
Oh, well, just to specialize in something that like your company may want.
Right, right. It really is about specialized expertise. That's what grad school, it's what makes it completely different and unique from being an undergraduate, right? And so we jump into this. I wanted to be a manager in my company too. And so I'd been accepted to grad schools before I'd even gone into AmeriCorps to go on and get my master's degree in landscape architecture and just keep on going. I took that and chucked that entire plan out the window. I found a professor here at Purdue who was studying human dimensions of natural resources. I didn't really know what in the world that was, right? I mean, my guess, I just really had no idea what that was. But as we started talking, what she shared with me is that, look, working with the public is a skill set that doesn't just come magically to people, right? Working with communities where you have lots and lots of conflicting interests and people disagree a lot is difficult. Finding ways to collaborate takes a skill set, right? So, how many of you love working in group projects? All right, we got one. Why do you love working in group projects?
Because you don't have to do everything.
Because you don't have to do everything. That's a great reason to work in groups. I saw somebody else's hand go up over here. Anybody else want to own up to it?
I like working with people.
Right?
Oh, I like getting other people's input.
Right. That's the amazing part of groups. Okay, the rest of you didn't raise your hands. Why don't we like working in group projects? Any ideas?
Because then you have to coordinate with other people.
Right. It turns out that coordinating with other people is hard. Right? What do you think? Right. You get in fights. Right? Conflict is part of this, right? You know, I started my career as a landscape architect thinking I was going to design people's backyards. I ended up designing much, much bigger things, entire cities, right? But even as a designer, one of the things it was like, well, I'm the designer, right? We can take some input from people, the client, but we're going to get those, we're going to get our list of specifications, and then we're going to go jump into the design process, and away we go. Turns out that's not how it works. This development there on the left, right? One of the things that popped up is that there was a lot of wealthy people that live in this black area on my drawing, right? And guess what? They didn't want anyone building anything anywhere near their backyard. To this day, that part of this development's never been built, even though this was fast-tracked after Katrina to build housing for the region, right? And so these things come up over and over again. And so for me, this led to not only a master's degree, but also a PhD that are focused on the sociology of working with communities. So sociology of community development, working on the human dimensions aspects of working on environmental projects. And it means that I've worked with lots and lots of people who disagree with one another. I do a lot of work with farmers, because here in the Midwest, if you care about the environment, it turns out that 75% of our landscape is in agriculture, and if agriculture is doing bad things that hurt the environment, guess what? You're not going to fix it by doing small things in urban places. And so working with people that disagree with me, that have other objectives, that have other economic incentives that drive them to different behaviors is challenging. But that's service, right? That's the idea. If you actually want to get in and solve problems, you've got to figure out how to work with people. So for me, that was, graduate work. I then went on and spent almost a decade as both a professor and an extension specialist in the University of Wisconsin system. where this is what I did. I would go out and work with communities 3 days a week, and then I'd lecture on campus 2 days a week, right? Solving lots and lots of different things. And then 5 years ago, I got the opportunity to come back home here to Purdue and take over the Center for Community and Environmental Design. And so it's kind of what I want to talk to you about today is just kind of what is community environmental design and where this is going, right? For me, as I think about, the fact that I misspelled environmental this afternoon as I was changing my slide design is awesome. But, we'll jump into that in a minute, right? So for me, it takes a lot of different disciplines to really do the job that I do and work in kind of the space of community and environmental design. And so the things that I've picked up along the way, certainly landscape architecture, and with the landscape architecture, lots and lots of site engineering skills. As we jump into land use and conservation planning, this is how do we work across multiple scales, right? It's wonderful, right? Engaging with the public when you have one site, right? Let's say we were working, on a project. Somebody said that there was a park project or a playground project. Is anybody involved in that in here? Is that your EPICS project? Somebody give me an example of who your client is. Maybe we'll go there. I saw your hand first.
Yeah, sure. We work with Miller Elementary that's in Lafayette.
Right. And so who are the people that you work with?
I work with their vice principal mostly.
Okay. So you get it's amazing when you get a single project at a single site with one contact person, right? Okay. Let's blow that out and start to look at the entire Wabash River corridor going through all of Lafayette, West Lafayette. Who are we going to have to work with if we want to start making positive changes along the Wabash River? So one of the things I'll tell you about the Wabash River is when I was growing up in this community, you really didn't want to touch the water, right? I've done a lot of water quality work in my career, and I still stand by that statement that there was open ditches, open sewers running out of manufacturing facilities dumping straight in. City of Lafayette basically treated the Wabash as a way to discharge all of their waste directly into the river. It wasn't an all the time thing, but they didn't have the capacity to treat it. Since that time, they've spent, I'm going to say $100 million adding capacity to that system, and they're doing much, much better than they used to. The river realistically is a pretty safe place to recreate at this point in time. There's still some limitations that I have to remind my grad student about on a regular basis because he fishes down there and eats what he catches. But those are things that are definitely out there. So the things that really, come back and connect for me when I talk about service is that the things that drive me is working with communities to create open space for nature and guide development to create livable communities. I started working on the projects that are just now starting to get built along the Wabash River 20 years ago, right? And so we're now, for me personally, it's 20 years. The people that trained me and brought me into these problems and been working on them for 30 years prior to that. There's decades of action. And one of those challenges comes back to working with people. So as you think about just working in a community the size of Lafayette, West Lafayette, which are not large communities, who are the different groups of people that you're going to actually have to engage with to work on these issues? I want you to take a couple minutes and think about that, and we're going to share out. So who would you have to work with to improve the environmental conditions of the Wabash, add recreation and parks along this river corridor to make it a place that Purdue students might actually spend time? All right, so who would you have to work with? That's the question. I want you to take a couple minutes, talk to somebody sitting next to you. Fortunately, the Clean Water Act has cleaned up that problem. Wabash is much cleaner on that front today than it was 20 years ago. Yep. All right, what are some ideas, right? So I always look for that lull in conversations, right? Whenever a group's talking, there's an initial burst and then we lull, right? I heard a bunch of ideas coming from over here. Who would we have to meet with and talk to start working on that issue?
The first idea I had was people living up along the Wabash, obviously in West Lafayette and Lafayette, just because if you're modifying the river itself or how it flows, that can lead to a lot of changes on how the river behaves. I know we've been
Right.
under flood watch for, feels like a month now, so.
Right. Wabash River here in Indiana is the longest undammed river in east of the Mississippi in the United States. It's 412 miles of undammed river, right, that runs through there. And you were right, a lot of people own property that backs up onto it, and they care pretty passionately about everything that you do that might affect downstream flooding, right? What about somebody else? I kind of caught your eye, so I'm sorry, I don't know names, so I just kind of point.
I was just thinking, city officials or who's ever in charge of
Absolutely.
area.
Right. We have two different cities, right? West Lafayette elects a very different city council and mayor than Lafayette elects, right? Two different cities that don't always agree. Lafayette, loved the river so much that they moved all of the railroads from 5th Street down to block all of downtown off from the river so that you could never, ever access the river again. Biggest civil engineering project, it took 40 years to complete, cost $150 million. But they sure did manage to cut off the river. And now that things are improving, they're actually trying to figure out how to deck over that so they can get access back to the river again, right? Again, sometimes we don't think too far ahead when we're starting to work through things, right? There are many, many different people that come up. This project in particular, if you're from Indiana, this is probably something that you're aware of. Libby and Abby were two young girls. They were 13-year-olds that were killed in Delphi, Indiana, just north of here. They were murdered on the Community Trail Network. And about 2.5 years after this happened, the grandparents and the families came to me and asked if we would help them design a memorial park. They convinced a landowner to give them 25 acres of land, and they thought that this is still an unsolved murder at this point today, but this is, they wanted something physical that they could start working towards. And you can see just some quick examples. We start to think about the complexities of working with different groups. Working with a family that's actively grieving while they're going through a murder investigation. This was emotional. It was a huge roller coaster for myself and the students that were involved in this. But you can see some of the ideas that started to pop up on this. I will tell you, basically as quick as we could hand them drawings, they were building it, which is not how we normally do things. But in this case, is exactly what's happened. And this park's actually open today, right? It opened last summer. And so, this took them 3.5 years, basically, from drawings to finished landscape. And so, lots of things that I continue to work on. Just to share some of the others, I get drawn into lots and lots of other challenges. Water quality is something we just talked about a minute ago. And water quality has lots of dimensions to it. This is a community up in Wisconsin. It's an amazing lake. You can kind of see the lake here in different seasons. But they don't have, we know exactly what's going on in this lake. There is a nutrient pollution problem coming from agriculture that is turning this lake green in the summer. Lots and lots of algae. It is damaging the lake to a point where people are actually starting to move away from this lake. Right? This is their watershed. We know the land use trends. We can look at all of this. The thing that we don't really understand is this issue of people. And so one of the things that I do spend a lot of time on and that I really like working is working through with communities, thinking about the future. Right? Thinking